Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, October 17th, and the Yankees 2018 season is done. It has been consigned to the dustbin of history. We were finished off in the worst possible way with two horrible losses at home at the hands of our worst enemy, in which we were out-hit, out-pitched, out-coached, and out-managed to an extent that even I, cynical me, did not believe possible. It was a very bitter pill to swallow, and we'll get into it all. You can follow us on Twitter, @BombersPodcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our Mailbag segment here in the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. We're on Spotify as well, or give us a call, 646-854-4959. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@BronxBombersPodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked which free agent pitchers the Yankees should pursue, and I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers about Manny Machado and our potential 2019 infield scenario. Also, he's the resident expert at the blog Yanks Go Yard. Our friend Mike Calendrillo rejoins the show to talk Yankee baseball, and we'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly from the ALDS. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Who was the last New York Yankee to wear uniform number 23? Was it A, Don Mattingly, B, Ricky Henderson, C, Dave Winfield, or D, Bobby Mercer? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
I tell you what, normally when the Yankees get eliminated, which is becoming, unfortunately, a yearly thing here, I sort of go through a day or so where I'm not up to snuff. I feel bad about it. Like last year after Game 7 in Houston, it was 24 hours or so where I was kind of bummed out, and then I was back to my normal self. But this was different. And this was like, 72 hours at least of being in a quiet rage. And I'll be honest, I'm not completely over it yet. I may never get over it because for a lot of reasons, this was a much more disquieting elimination than last year. Last year, we exceeded expectations with a happy, scrappy bunch that got us one win from the World Series. But this year, first of all, we got bumped off in an earlier round that didn't even go the limit. And remember what I told you guys 2 weeks ago? I said that everybody was getting too hot and bothered about beating the Mariners' 1997 home run record because they only won a single playoff game that year. Well, guess how many playoff games we won this year? 1. So the early exit was bad. The fact that it was the Red Sox beating us at home was especially bad. The fact that our coaching staff, led by pitching coach Larry Rothschild, missed the fact that Severino was tipping his pitches, that was horrendous. Aaron Boone, I'll save him because he so outdid himself in the realm of incompetence in this series that he earned his own special section. But I'll say this. I praised Boone, probably way too much, it turns out, for how he handled the wild card games, partially because I felt bad, I think, that I had been so rough on him all year. But apparently that game was a total fluke because the job he did during the ALDS was like a masterclass in managerial malfeasance. And to make matters worse, he wouldn't even admit that he screwed up until Cashman in his press conference and then Hal Steinbrenner in his interview with Michael Kay said that he screwed up by not pulling Severino earlier. And he still hasn't admitted, Boone has not admitted, that he screwed up by not pulling Sabathia earlier. So that was all bad. The fact that our home run happy offense did exactly what I feared they would do in the postseason, not hit home runs and strike out a ton, was very bad. The fact that the Yankees, despite all these failures, announced that they would keep every single member of our coaching staff next year was bad. It's even ludicrous. And this was this is a series loss for the ages, folks, in terms of the pain that it inflicted on this fan base. And yes, I realize there are other teams that have inflicted far more pain on their fans, and no, I don't care. As I said all year, our regular season home run total does not matter. Even our regular season win total doesn't matter as long as it got us into the postseason, which it did. What matters is what happens in October. And in October, this team fell apart, really, from top to bottom, with a few minor exceptions who we'll get to. But as I said at the top, there's no way to characterize this season as anything but a major disappointment. And yes, we had injuries, and this Didi Tommy John surgery thing that came out of nowhere really hurts. But we were healthy more or less for the first time this October, and all that health yielded was just a truly horrendous end to the most frustrating 100-win season you'll ever want to see. And with that, we get into the final 2018 edition of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, as we take a hard look at the Yankees' performance in the ALDS and separate the studs from the duds. So let's dispatch with the good, which can be done fairly quickly. Aaron Judge, with the exception of Game 4, in which he did not have a hit, was excellent, I thought, in this series. Now, I didn't think that blasting New York, New York within proximity of the Red Sox clubhouse in Fenway after that Game 2 win up there was advisable, nor do I think it really had much of an impact on our fortunes at all. But I have a feeling that Judge will not do that again in the future, and I'm not going to kill him for it. I think he's a guy that has shown a great deal of class on a number of occasions, really, and it was probably just high spirits on his part, not a troll move, but still kind of immature and short-sighted, I think. But Judge had a big series, better than his counterpart, Mookie Betts, actually. Judge going 6 for 14, hitting .375, 2 home runs, 1194 OPS, and only struck out twice in those 4 games. Also good, excellent in fact, was Masahiro Tanaka, and he proved the doubters, including yours truly, wrong again, at least in the postseason. He's been our best pitcher the past couple of years in the playoffs without question. Pitched an absolute gem in Boston in Game 2, 3 hits in 6 innings, just 1 earned run. Composed, masterful, and dominant was Masahiro Tanaka, and our bullpen was also good for the most part. I'm throwing out that Game 4 16-1 fiasco out the window because Boone idiotically brought in Lance Lynn to relieve Severino, wrong move, and then Chad Green was uncharacteristically horrible. Stephen Tarpley got bombed, but I'll tell you what, when Austin Romine, our backup catcher, pitches better than Severino in a playoff game at home against the Red Sox, something is very wrong, deeply wrong. But that's what happened in that game. So a game which all by itself validated every bad thing I've ever said about Aaron Boone. But with the bullpen, Chapman was good. Betances, I thought, was very good for the most part. David Robertson, now a free agent, was very good as well. But as Porky Pig likes to say, that's all, folks. No more good. And the headliner of our bad section has to be Giancarlo Stanton, the strikeout king, who gave an absolutely putrid performance in this series, waving feebly at pitches way out of the zone and standing there like a muscle-bound statue staring at pitches right down the middle of the plate. And before, I listed all the reasons why this was a worse series loss than last year, but I forgot to mention this. This series raised the awful possibility, maybe even the likelihood, that after just getting out from under some truly awful contracts, the A-Rod contract, the Teixeira contract, Sabathia, that, we got ourselves a brand new stinker, $375 million for this guy. And in the 4 games of this series, he struck out 6 times, so a third of his plate appearances he struck out. He did not notch a single extra base hit. And of course, during the regular season, he struck out 211 times, so 30% of his plate appearances this year. That's a franchise record. And you look back at sluggers that we've had in past eras, home run hitters who struck out a lot. Reggie Jackson comes to mind, Dave Winfield. You even look at a guy like Dave Kingman, who was just only very briefly a Yankee, but just legendary for how much he struck out. And none of those guys even approached this level that Stanton has reached with the whiffing this year. It's pitiful, it's embarrassing, and we saw it happen at the worst possible times this year all the time, and it happened for the final time in that 9th inning rally of Game 4 that predictably fell short. And I've said before, I personally don't boo athletes, but I've also said that people have a right to do so if they choose without being judged for it. But assuming Stanton continues with his whiffing ways over the next couple of years, if booing him gets him to exercise that option after the 2020 season and depart for some small market team where everyone's nice and polite and where he can strike out in peace, then boo away, because 10 years and $375 million is a lot to have invested in a guy who just seems unable to adjust to situations where just putting the ball in play could help score a run, which is exactly what he did not do in that rally that fell short. He struck out miserably. Also bad, horrible in fact, were all of our starters not named Masahiro Tanaka. Jay Happ, who was acquired largely because he had good numbers against Boston, looked uncharacteristically nervous in his Game 1 start in Fenway, missed the plate consistently, and when he was in the zone, he got hammered. Just a dreadful performance, lasting only 2 innings. CC Sabathia in Game 4 was equally dreadful, if not more so, lasting just 3 innings, which is one more than he should have lasted. 5 hits, 3 earned runs, a hit batsman, base runners galore, and then in a complete abdication of personal responsibility, I thought, decides to blame the home plate umpire, Angel Hernandez, after the game, who's not a good umpire, but I thought called an adequate game. More than adequate, actually. I thought he was fine. And who is absolutely not to blame for the failures of the grossly over-the-hill CC Sabathia. New Jersey native Rick Porcello, who was excellent in that game, by the way, said after he heard those CC quotes, Porcello said, quote, "Throw the ball over the plate, CC. You got to put the ball over the white part of the plate, and then you get the strikes called," unquote, which is exactly right. And I really hope that this is it for CC in pinstripes. He's a guy that I've liked, but he's definitely worn out his welcome here as far as I'm concerned, and has proven 2 years in a row that he's a liability in the postseason. Remember, he pitched the game last year when we got eliminated in Houston as well. But the worst was Luis Severino, who, let's face it, guys, is not an ace. He just isn't. I mean, an ace, first of all, remembers what time the game starts, okay? I mean, that's, I would say, the minimum standard, and it's a very low bar indeed, but it's a bar that Severino was apparently unable to clear. I mean, I know the Yankees denied it after the game, but yeah, not buying it. A rushed, 8-minute warm-up before a playoff game is highly, highly unusual. It's really unheard of. And every Yes broadcaster, including John Flaherty, former catcher for the Yankees, said the same thing. And you can clearly see on the video that Larry Rothschild is mouthing the words 7:40 start to Severino. Okay, 7:40 start. Now, why would you say those words to someone who knew what time the game started? Spoiler alert, you wouldn't. And so that was, inauspicious when Ron Darling pointed that out. And then Sevy goes out there and just proceeds to take a giant dump on the mound, basically just got destroyed. And it turns out, as I said, he was tipping his pitches. So is that supposed to make us feel any better? Well, it doesn't. All it tells me is that not only is our quote-unquote ace a consistent postseason mediocrity, but so is our coaching staff, really, for not picking this up. I mean, this is not a new issue with Severino. It's happened before, and it happened against the Red Sox. And someone might say, well, what can the Yankees do about it? Well, I don't know. They own a network, the Yes Network. Presumably that network has an extra camera. How about keeping a camera pointed at the opposing dugout and taking a look at the feed now and then when our pitchers are on the mound? So if opposing teams are calling out, fastball, slider, as the Red Sox were, we can see that. How about that? And then I've heard people say, well, if Sevy was tipping his pitches, that can't be fixed during the game. Well, okay. How about if he's doing it during a playoff game, a crucial playoff game against the Red Sox, that you get him the hell out of there? Just get him off the mound. I mean, and while the suggestion box is open, how about if our starter shows up late to his bullpen session before a playoff game, you use a freaking opener until he's warmed up? I mean, this is the New York Yankees with what we're told is the most cutting-edge sabermetric staff in the history of the freaking universe. And they can't figure this out, really? It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. But as far as his actual performance, Severino, who like Sabathia, was pulled far too late, was atrocious. 3 innings, 7 hits, 6 earned runs. And those 3 innings were really only the first course of a night of true horror. I mean, Halloween came early this year. This was the worst postseason loss in franchise history. And a game in which, like Game 4, the Yankee hitters were absolutely shut down by a guy, Nathan Eovaldi, who's not exactly Sandy Koufax, let's put it that way. But I do think he's actually vastly improved from when he was a Yankee. He pitched well again last night, and I happen to think that he's a guy that Cashman should take a hard look at this winter. He is a free agent. But I've talked for months on this podcast about how this swing and miss, home run happy approach will not play well in the postseason, and it didn't. And when I hear from Cashman that he has no problem with our offensive approach, it kind of drives me up a tree. I mean, it really does. The Yankees as a team this year hit .249. That is the worst among all the teams that either won their division or made the wild card game. game, and we saw all year that when we did not hit home runs, we did not win. And that is exactly what happened in the ALDS. The only game that we won was the game that we hit home runs, game 2. And the others were a total nightmare. In those last 2 games in particular, 2 runs in 18 innings in our stadium. And, as we've documented, the Yankees were horrendous all year with runners in scoring position, and they were just as bad in this series, 4 for 26, hitting .214 with runners in scoring position. And I realize that batting average is now like a scorned statistic in the age of sabermetrics, and for mostly good reasons, I think. But guess what? It's still a pretty good indicator of a good hitter. And if you want to know why J.D. Martinez was so much better than Giancarlo Stanton this year, here's why. They both hit for power, but only Martinez hit for average. So when you strike out at a record pace, that should be alarming to Yankee management, and it matters. And when you hit in the low 200s, it also matters. And call me old school, but this is really just common sense. I mean, in that 16-1 drubbing in Game 3, yes, Brock Holt had a home run, but it was off Austin Romine. So the Red Sox scored 15 of those 16 runs off legitimate pitchers without going deep once. Okay, 15 runs without a single home run. The Red Sox hitters put on an absolute clinic this year, team batting average 19 points higher than the Yankees. Only 9th in home runs in the majors, but still scored the most runs. And so again, when I see Brian Cashman sit there and say he's fine with our offensive approach, maybe that more than anything makes this series loss sting the most, because if he's being honest there, then the Yankees sure as hell have not learned much from this fiasco. Ugly, of course, was Aaron Boone, who again was just unsightly in this series to a degree even I didn't think possible. To make the same mistake 2 games in a row, just sitting there in the dugout, snacking on sunflower seeds while 2 of our starters crash and burn, and just as bad, bringing in the wrong guys in relief. Truly is a unique 2-step strategy in the postseason. First, let your starters implode in spectacular fashion, and then don't bring in your best pitchers to follow it up. He managed the last 2 games of our season as if they were spring training games. He said afterwards he wanted to squeeze a few more innings out of Severino. Why? To save our bullpen for December? For January? Oh yeah, there's no games then. And he said, he also said he got greedy. For what? To see if the Red Sox could put up 3 touchdowns in our house? What the actual hell was this guy doing? I said it before, I don't think Boone was trying to throw games this year. Obviously, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it almost seemed like he was with the stupidity of some of these moves. Anyone with eyes, anyone, could see that neither Severino or Sabathia had anything. And to just absorb needless damage like that with a rested bullpen should really be enough to get him fired. But of course, he'll be back next year with a fresh supply of sunflower seeds. And again, it's not personal. I think, he seems like a good guy, and I watched his press conference on Friday, and he definitely seemed genuinely disturbed by what had transpired. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, if you look at the video, and it was not a put on. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Brian Cashman had a Maserati last winter, and in hiring Aaron Boone, who was, let's face it, he was an ordinary player and then an announcer for ESPN. That's his resume. A guy with 0 coaching experience. Cashman handed the keys to this Maserati to a teenager, essentially, without a driver's license, and is it any surprise whatsoever that the car got totaled? Back in a moment. We are joined this week on Bronx Bombers once again by Mike Calendrillo, resident expert of the blog Yanks Go Yard, where you can always find awesome Yankee commentary. They cover the Bombers from all angles. Highly recommend it. Mike, it's great to have you back on the podcast. I wish it was under happier circumstances. How you doing, man?
I'm very well, thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be back. It's been a little bit of a tough week, but I get to talk to you, so it's a little brighter today.
Oh, thanks, man. So let's start with what just happened, this first round collapse. If you had to put your finger on the biggest reason why the Yankees lost this ALDS to the Red Sox, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I really could go a number of different ways, but I'd have to go number one being the Yanks' inability to score runs. They were outscored 31-14 in the series and hit a horrendous 154 with runners in scoring position. I mean, that's 4 for 26. The evidence is right there. Gleyber Torres, game 4, ground out in the 9th inning with 2 men on, down by 1. This is not something that was surprising to anyone because the Yankees dealt with this all season long, and we knew eventually it was going to come back to bite us, and it did. Now, on the other flip side, people will say, well, you gave up 31 runs, and yes, that was a massive problem, and that points directly to 3 out of the 4 starters that were unable to last more than 3 innings. I mean, only Tanaka went 5 innings in game 2 and gave the club basically a fighting chance. So you have to look at, it's the offense and it's the pitching. But if I had to go with one, because again, the bullpen did step up, you've got to look at those runners in scoring position and being unable to get them across.
Yeah. So getting to the manager, what bothered me about Boone in this series wasn't just that he made the critical mistake of leaving Severino in too long, but he compounded it, A, by bringing in the wrong reliever in Lance Lynn, and B, making the same exact mistake the very next night with Sabathia. And yet we'll see him again next year in the dugout. That didn't surprise me. But Cashman's announcement that all the coaches would come back, that kind of did. I mean, a number of our hitters regressed horribly this year, but hitting coach Marcus Thames is coming back. Severino tipped his pitches against the Red Sox, and our pitching coach missed that. But Larry Rothschild is coming back. I mean, were you surprised at the lack of accountability for our coaching staff? And should that staff and our manager basically, be auditioning to keep their jobs next year? Yeah,
absolutely. Again, I figured Boone would be back. He's tied to Cashman at this point, having Cashman basically chosen him last off season. But yeah, as far as the rest of the coaching staff, to me, it was a disappointment. Obviously, not getting back to where you were a season ago, the ALCS, anything less than that in my eyes was something that shouldn't go unaffected. And to me, the biggest surprise is Larry Rothschild returning for his 8th season next year. I still believe when Girardi was fired last year that the whole staff should have been turned over. And I mean, it practically was, except for Rothschild and bullpen coach Mike Karki. There's just a thing like players, after a while, coaches become stale. And I contend that a brilliant baseball mind, a guy like David Cohn, who's up in the booth working for the Yes Network, would make an excellent pitching coach. I mean, he pitched for both New York teams, let alone the Yankees, and pitched extremely well for a very long time. And even if it isn't him per se, there's plenty of other guys out there that you would think would bring some freshness to the team. I mean, you look at where the club was this year, and Aaron Boone had a miserable time managing his bullpen, and B, the staff really regressed from where it was in 2017. Yet you bring Rothschild back because he is the one elder statesman, the guy that Boone was supposed to bounce ideas off of, and you can see all year there was some kind of disconnect. Now, I'm not in the dugout, so I don't know, but either Boone was not speaking to Rothschild or Rothschild was not giving advice, because there was just things that you would think Rothschild would have said, well, wait a minute, let's go the opposite direction, or let's try this because I've been the pitching coach here for 7 seasons, but for some reason the issues were not diagnosed. Severino, Gray, Lynn, Germán, Sessa, even Tanaka at times, they all were worse this year than they were last year.
So before we get to the upcoming free agent class of pitchers, I'm curious, do you want Sabathia back?
Not at all. It pains me to say, because he's been so good for so long, and yeah, he's a bulldog, and I know he started 29 games this year, and he's a clubhouse leader, and yes, his numbers were good. I mean, 9-7, 3.65, 1.3 whip, struck out 140, pitched 152 innings, but look, Game 4 was a sign of what we're going to get from a 39-year-old with an arthritic right knee. It kind of bothered me, and I shouldn't even say kind of. It did bother me that before that start, he's out there talking about pitching next season, even if it isn't in New York. To me, you go out and perform to the best of your ability, whether, it's now, later, and after the playoffs, after it's over, whether you've been eliminated or you've won the World Series, then you let your intentions be known. But he seemed so consumed with that one more contract, I'm coming back, I don't care if it's with the Yankees, that he really missed what was right in front of him, which was the chance to extend the series. Because Game 4, this is our guy. He's got an 8-3 postseason record with the Yankees. He's our go-to. And he lasted 59 pitches. If you're looking to bring back one veteran left-hander, if you want to invest similar money in a smart smarter move, it's J.A. Happ. And I know he disappointed in that game one against the Red Sox. But again, he's 36. He'll be 36, a couple years younger than Sabathia. He was still 7-0 with a 2.69 ERA and struck out 63 in 51 innings pitched. I mean, he was the best thing on the mound in the second half. And if the Yankees didn't acquire him from the Blue Jays, they likely wouldn't have made the playoffs, to be quite honest. So if I had to pick one or the other, it's definitely Happ. And CC, it's been a great ride, but it's time to go our separate ways. And it's not just him. There's a couple guys on this team that have kind of spent their last days in pinstripes, in my opinion.
So, Mike, I think most people agree that starting pitching has to be our number one priority this offseason, and there's a bunch of talented free agent pitchers on the market this winter. None of them are aces, and all seem to have a question mark or two. But of the free agent pool, which includes J. Happ, Ryu of the Dodgers, Charlie Morton, Corbin, Evaldi, a number of others, give me a couple that you'd like to see Cashman go after and why.
Yeah, I'm only in love with one, and it's Corbin. He'll be 30. He's coming up an all-star campaign. I know he's only 11-7, but he pitched for the Diamondbacks, so you got to give him that. 3.15 ERA, 2.18 BAA, struck out 246. I mean, that was third best in the league. And again, 200 injury-free innings. I mean, that's the key. And John Heyman's already reported that he is the Yanks' top target. Take that for what it's worth. He grew up a Syracuse native, has been a Yankee fan. I mean, it was back in May that he was actually talking about what it might be like to pitch for the Yankees and how excited he got now, when we know that can't make the Diamondbacks happy. So obviously they're going to extend the qualifying offer to him, $17.9 million. Luckily, no longer does that come with a first-round pick. So again, that to me is a guy that I'm going after. I mean, he only received 3.78 runs per nine from the Diamondbacks, gives up about 0.68 homers per nine, only walks about 2.1 per nine. It's got a .99 whip. I mean, this is against right-handers. These are all great numbers that play exceptionally well at Yankee Stadium. And to me, like you said, there's no real number one, but this guy would be a optimal number two to put right behind Severino, really take a lot of that pressure off. There's some comparisons to Danny Duffy, the type of deal that he got a couple years ago. I think he's a better pitcher than Danny Duffy is. So I can see about a 5-year, $75, $80 million deal, upwards. But again, luxury tax shouldn't be a problem. Other than him, like I said, don't love the market. Will Clayton Kershaw opt out of 3 years and $80 million? I probably, just because he can re-up for 5 years and $120 million with the Dodgers. But again, is it worth it at with a questionable back? I mean, we'd see now every year he spends a little bit more time with a DL. Other than that, you mentioned, I mean, Evaldi, yeah, he was a Yankee. He continues to kill the Yankees, but how much do you trust him? Do you really want to go down that path again? Do we want another Javi Vasquez? I mean, that's something that I would be curious about. Gio Gonzalez looks great for the Brewers right now, but Gio Gonzalez is no more than a 500 pitcher. Same with Dallas Keuchel. He's a number 4 right now with Houston, and some could say he's a number 5. I mean, do you want to pay him number 2 money? Charlie Morton, 35 years old. I still don't believe what he's doing is realistic. Call me crazy, but I always think of the Charlie Morton with the Pirates and the Phillies. I just can't get over it. I know what he's doing is great. I know he's got amazing, velo, and his spin rate is great, but to me, I don't see it playing out well in Yankee Stadium. In my opinion, you got to get Severino to get back to his first half 2018 dominance. You sign a guy like Corbin, and then you've got to get an emergence from one of these kids. Justice Sheffield, Jonathan Lozoya, those are the guys that you need to step up, because this staff has to get younger. The rest of the free agents, they really don't drastically change the makeup of the staff. So you bring back J.A. Happ, and you hopefully get something from one of these kids, and you go from there. But signing an Evaldi and signing a Ryu, it's just more question marks. And again, we've got plenty of question marks, let alone Tanaka, who's pitching, it seems like, on borrowed time with that elbow. So I wouldn't want to go ahead and add more confusion to a staff that it's already shaky at best.
That's Mike Calendrillo of the blog Yanks Go Yard. You've been listening to part 1 of that conversation, and you can hear part 2 of that interview on the next episode of Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Who was the last New York Yankee to wear number 23? The answer? A. Don Mattingly. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. Which free agent pitchers besides J. Happ and Patrick Corbin should the Yankees go after this offseason? And 37% of our followers on Twitter @BombersPodcast said Charlie Morton. 22% said Dallas Keuchel, 15% said Nathan Eovaldi, and 26% said none of the above. And the reason I said besides Happ and Corbin is I'm pretty sure the Yankees are going to go after both those guys, especially Corbin. So I wanted to get a sense of who else you guys thought should be considered. And there's a few others out there. I mean, Kershaw technically could opt out, but I don't think he will. I think he's a Dodger for life. Lance Lynn is a free agent. I think he should be a hard pass for the Yankees. I think Sabathia, they should also pass on, and a few more. Matt Harvey, Hyunjin Ryu of the Dodgers, who I probably should have included in that poll. I think he's actually a very underrated member of that LA staff. Gio Gonzalez, a few others, but of the guys that I listed there, Morton, Keuchel, and Eovaldi, I mean, look, all come with question marks. Morton, who grew up a Yankee fan, actually, in Flemington, New Jersey, idolizing Derek Jeter and Roger Clemens, turns 35 next month. Keuchel did not have a great year, at least not by his standards, 3.74 ERA, which is identical to Tanaka, and Eovaldi had serious elbow surgery last year and has been kind of inconsistent since, although much better of late and obviously phenomenal against the Yankees. Now, as I said, I'm like 95% sure that Corbin is going to be in pinstripes by the end of the year. Like Morton, he grew up a Yankee fan in upstate New York, and there's definite mutual interest there, and he had a very solid year, 3.15 ERA, 1.050 whip, that's walks plus hits per inning pitched. That's the lowest of any of the guys that I mentioned. So here's the thing. There aren't that many true aces in Major League Baseball. Fewer than 10, I would say, actually. Verlander, Kershaw, DeGrom, Bumgarner, Scherzer, a few others maybe. I mean, these types of guys do not grow on trees, and none that I just mentioned are free agents. So without one of those guys next year, the Yankees run the risk of having a starting rotation comprised of basically just solid number 3 types, and that's it. Because as I said, Severino has yet to prove that he's an ace, in my opinion. He was, in fact, one of the very worst pitchers in baseball the second half of this year, and his performance against the Red Sox was a complete horror show. So ideally, Cashman does what he does best and pulls off a trade for a guy like Scherzer or DeGrom, and we can then throw out a rotation of something like Scherzer, Morton, Severino, Tanaka, Corbin. That's a rotation that you could stack up against most teams. But of the guys in the poll, this may surprise you, but I would actually set my sights on Charlie Morton. Yes, he's 35, but he really hasn't had any serious health issues the past couple of years, and I think the Yankees have to have a win-now attitude. And don't forget, we got David Cone in his mid-30s. We got David Wells in his mid-30s. And those guys were big contributors to championships. I'm not necessarily stacking up Charlie Morton against those two guys, but he's been pretty damn good the past couple of years, dominating, in fact. So I, for one, would like to see him in pinstripes next year. I think he's the closest thing to an ace in this free agent class. I do not think that Justice Sheffield is going to be ready next year. I do not think that we have anyone else in our system who's going to be ready. And as I said, if Cashman can swing a big trade for a guy like Scherzer or Bumgarner in addition, then we'll have what we need, what we've desperately needed these past few years, an actual bona fide championship rotation. Easier said than done, but this is not, Kansas City. This is the Yankees, man. You got to think big, you got to spend big to win big, and I think you got to do it now. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Tommy in Staten Island. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, or give us a call at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Tommy writes, Manny Machado is a great player, but after seeing Stanton beclown himself this postseason, I'm worried about taking on another huge contract. What other options are out there if the Yankees pass on Machado or Machado passes on us? Well, that's a great question, Tommy. I do think, I hope the Yankees work something out with Machado. I talked earlier in this podcast about J.D. Martinez and Stanton and why Martinez has had such a better year, batting average, namely, but I forgot to mention strikeouts. Stanton struck out 211 times, Martinez just 146. But Machado, who hit 297 this year with 37 home runs and a 905 OPS, so higher than Stanton's, only struck out 104 times. times. That's less than half of Stanton's strikeout total, and he had 4 more plate appearances than Stanton. He's also produced in the postseason, 2 home runs in the ALDS, another one in the ALCS, and a big double on Monday. So this is exactly the kind of guy that we need in our lineup. He's a generational talent, and by the way, an excellent fielder as well. So especially with Didi gone, potentially all or for at least most of next year, the Yankees have to go hard after Manny, and I'm sure they will. Whether it works out or not, who knows? I mean, remember last year at this time, we all thought that Shohei Ohtani was a done deal, and look how that worked out. But I think the Yankees, at the very least, have a better than 50-50 shot at signing Manny Machado. But as far as other options, Tommy, I guess the Yankees could bring Neil Walker back and have him play second and move Glaber over to short. I think Walker was a guy that contributed this year when given a chance. He also hits better lefty than righty, and we do have a very righty-dominated lineup. And remember, Walker went unsigned for a long time last spring and didn't really have a proper spring training, so there's that. So Walker's an option. The Yankees could also take a look at Daniel Murphy, who's also a left-handed hitter, but not a good defensive second baseman. And with Andujar and Torres not solid either, to me, that's kind of a deal breaker. Besides Walker and Murphy, another possibility would be Ben Zobrist. That would have to be a trade. The first 2 guys I mentioned are free agents. Zobrist is not, but he will be in the final year of his contract, and the Cubs have a lot of infield depth. So maybe if the price is right, that could happen. Ben Zobrist is a switch hitter, does not strike out a lot. Actually, of the 3 guys that I mentioned, I think he'd probably be the best option. A good defender as well. But again, I think if you can swing it, you pull the trigger on Manny Machado. He's just 26 years of age, and he's been putting up all-star numbers for 5 years now. I mean, really almost future Hall of Fame type numbers, and he's absolutely the best overall player in this free agent class. I think he's significantly better as a player than Bryce Harper, and he actually fills a need for us, whereas Harper really does not with our crowded outfield. So Tommy, if the Machado thing falls through, I would look at Zobrist, Walker, and Murphy in that order, but I think in the end, Hal Steinbrenner opens up the safe and we land the big fish. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. We're on Spotify as well. Follow us on Twitter, @BombersPodcast is the handle. Like us on Facebook as well, but most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.